What happens when children come out and they are learning in terms of a different curriculum, but then you still find that higher education hasn't caught up? There seems to be a gap in the middle. So what you are doing is very much in line with what Fred Swanepoel is doing with his African Leadership University, but that's just an exception to the rule.
So there are a couple of things. For starters, we have to understand that education is a long-term game, because it's been proven many times over that if you invest properly in early childhood development, we reap the benefits much, much more later on. And the return on investment on human capital development is a lot more later on. This country has tended to focus a lot more on what happens, for instance, in matric. We're a big matric country in South Africa, but also there's been a huge focus on higher education. In other words, community colleges, TVET colleges, or universities. The whole debate around decolonization and around access to education has tended to focus a lot more on the upper end. And we must consider that those people who are entering tertiary education are already the privileged few, because we all know that out of about 1 million children who enter basic education in schools in our country, we only have a throughput at the end of the day of about 60% of them, which means about 40% of our young people leave the system or exit the system, especially between grades 9 and grade 12. And those people end up, contributing to what we call the non-employed or not employed, not in education and training, and contribute to the unemployment and poverty and inequality in the country. So the first thing is we have to fix the issue of investing in basic education. Of course, it is important that institutions of higher learning are up to scratch and have adapted their curriculum and ways of teaching, not only to Africanize their curriculum, which a lot of universities are now doing. You now see universities that have African knowledge systems units or departments in various of our institutions. But also it is important that we're teaching, imparting the skills amongst young people that are preparing them for the future. Today, the fourth industrial revolution requires that we bring some of these new trends like big data, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, blockchain technology, and so on, and integrate humanities into how we're teaching young people. But you find that at a lot of universities, humanities is still a department or a faculty on its own, which is different and separate from an engineering faculty, as an example. So it is important that we have new ways of how we're thinking about how we deliver the curriculum. But also, importantly, it is important, of course, for universities to increase our level of research, especially into solving the problems that we have in the continent, whilst at the same time, we're ensuring that we're imparting the skills like communication skills. How do you write reports? Creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, because very often universities only still focus on knowledge, they don't focus on the skills, but also we've got to increase the level of focus on the competencies that we expect young people to do.
When a learner walks out of your doors and they're finally independent and ready to go into university or whatever it is that they want to do next, what kind of a learner do you want to walk out of this institution's doors?
We want students that are entrepreneurs, that are leaders, that are playing a really meaningful role in society. That's why when you look at project-based learning, the driving question of any project, it may be from a grade 1 or grade 10, it is always about every single project, maybe a mini project or a term project, an annual project as an example. It is about driving question of solving real problems that we have in Africa. There may be problems of water, of housing, problems of food, problems of technology, or that we can solve through technology as an example. The driving question is always about what problem are we trying to solve and how relevant is this problem in our African context or even in the global context. Because, we want to, at the end of the day, produce young people who are global in their outlook. In other words, who understand that there's nothing wrong with them and their DNA compared to a child who may be brought up in Silicon Valley or China or Japan or Latin America. And therefore, they need to have absolute understanding of what the kind of problems that we can solve, not only in the African context, but also in the global context. At the end of the day, we want young people who can really play a meaningful role in society.
We spoke about inequality a little bit earlier on in terms of the education space. You were chairman of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. How do we bring along that side of the population as well, people who may not necessarily have as much access, to create leaders that can solve some of our challenges, not only on a continental level, like you say, but internationally as well?
Yeah. One of the things that I'm really privileged to be exposed to is that I'm one of the co-founders of the National Education Collaboration Trust, the NECT. The NECT works with government and brings together business, labor, and civil society to help improve the quality of basic public education in the country. We all know that we have just over 24,000 schools in South Africa with about 420,000 teachers. So one of the things that is really important in the context of what we do at Future Nation Schools is to be able to do research and implement the new ways of learning and teaching that we can share with the big public system, because we have about 13 million young people or learners in the basic education system. So I'm really privileged that, I work with the Department of Basic Education because all of these things that we're talking about in terms of learning and teaching, the 21st century, the fourth industrial revolution, are important, especially for the big system, in other words, the public system. And if we can take our schools, for instance, as some of the laboratories that we can have as a country to say, if we talk about decolonization in the context of the fourth industrial revolution, what does it look like? What kind of curriculum should we have? How do we introduce computing, robotics, blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, African studies, entrepreneurship and leadership in, for instance, the CAPS curriculum in government? And I'm really very privileged in that I'm able to work with the public system, because it's really, really important. We can't leave our 30 million children that are in the basic education system behind. Yeah. Because, as you correctly say, even though we're affordable as a school, a chain of schools, at the end of the day, there are a lot of parents who cannot even afford the low level of fees that we charge in our schools. And therefore, we've got to work on the basis that we must all work together. Government on its own can't solve all the problems that we have in the country.